The K-9 obviously is a tool that we use to help us determine how fires start, or really more so than that, to help us find good evidence. Does anybody have any idea what Deacon specifically does for a job? Anybody in the room? How could Deacon help me in the pursuit of figuring out how fires start? Anybody? Sniffs around, right? But what's he looking for? All right, so odors that don't belong, right? So he's what we call an ignitable liquid detection K-9, which means he's looking for things that are just that, ignitable liquids, things that maybe don't necessarily belong in a fire. You know, things that come to mind typically would be like gas or lighter fluid or oil products that may be used to help someone start a fire that they shouldn't have. So he helps us. Can he tell me how a fire starts? Can the dog tell me how the fire started? Any particular place? He can't tell me if it started with cigarettes. He might want to tell me, but he certainly doesn't know how to speak to me. He tries to tell me things all the time, but it's unclear oftentimes what that is. It's usually that he wants a snack. So he can't tell us where the fire started or how the fire started, but he can certainly tell us if there's an ignitable liquid present, that, or he believes that there's an ignitable liquid present, and helps me to pinpoint exactly where that is. And in doing that, he helps us identify where. I think that's my microphone, so maybe I'm too close to this. So he helps us to identify where the best evidence is present, potentially present in a fire scene, so that we can pinpoint that exact location, collect that evidence, package it, and send it off to the crime lab to be analyzed by a chemist who can tell us exactly what it is that we found. So it really is a tool in helping us find really good evidence. Let's see. So where do we get these dogs from? Anybody have any idea? Do we just go and take a pet from home and bring him to work one day and decide he's now our new partner? We can't do that, right? Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about Deacon's story and sort of where he came from, and that can color the whole process. So Deacon was raised as a service dog at an organization called Paws with a Cause, which is in Michigan. They raise disability dogs for a variety of things. And what his specific function was, or his job was intended to be, is unclear. So he gets raised by essentially a foster family who participates in the process, and they raise these dogs in their own home to be obedient and trained for specific jobs, and they acclimate them to public places. If you see a puppy around town wearing a little vest that says, you know, service dog in training, that's sort of how he was raised. That process goes on for about a year. They bring him to public parks and public libraries and schools and the mall and all these different places to get them used to different noises and sound, you know, people and just different environments so that they're not spooked. And then those dogs that excel in those environments and that do a really good job at learning all those skills they need to help an individual with special needs, whatever those needs might be, they move on in that training process and they get eventually placed with someone that they can help throughout their lifetime. Deacon, however, much like a lot of dogs, don't make it to the end of that process. For whatever reason, they, I hate to use the word fail, but they essentially fail out of that service dog process. But during that process, there are certain dogs that have incredible drive, whether it be food drive or just praise. They want to work and they want to please the people that are trying to train them, but they probably have too much energy. So like Deacon, for example, he's trying to fool you today, but he's a high energy dog. He doesn't like to sit around and be stagnant. So he probably wouldn't make a good disability dog for somebody in, say, a wheelchair who stays in one, location and needs an animal to stay with them and help them open doors or help them open the refrigerator or pick up things off the floor. He probably wouldn't be very well suited at that. He may at this point, but when he was a puppy, he wasn't very well suited because he had too much energy, too much food drive. Sometimes we joke about these dogs that fail the cheeseburger test. And some of the dogs come from a program called Southeastern Guide Dogs, which is in Florida. And they raise seeing eye dogs for folks that are blind or have visual impairments. And we joke about the cheeseburger test. If your service dog, if you can't see and you're trying to eat dinner and your dog steals a cheeseburger off the table in front of you, probably not a great service dog. So that's one reason, a dog that has too much food drive. They're too interested in food. And the other ones are the high energy dogs. So Deacon, for whatever reason, didn't make it through that process, but was identified as a dog who had really, really good potential to do a job. Loves working, loves pleasing his handler, is very well acclimated to different situations. Like, for example, fireworks. Fireworks don't bother him. He can be standing next to fireworks as they're being shot off and it doesn't affect him at all. He's not impacted by crowds. Crowds don't bother him. As you can see, he'll take a nap anywhere. He gets an opportunity to do so. So he had this potential to be in a role where he could serve a purpose and be a working dog of some type, just not necessarily that. So the next step is he gets what we call put into a second career. And so Paws with a Cause identifies him as a potential candidate for another job, just not the job they initially thought he would be good at. And he got placed with the organization that I got him from, which is called Maine Specialty Dogs. And they do nothing but train what we call, people often call arson dogs. And so it's an ignitable liquid detection K-9. He's a certified police dog, and he has a single purpose, which is to find accelerants or ignitable liquids in fire scenes. So they go to Michigan, they grab him and a couple other dogs, and then they do what's called imprinting. And they train him on what it is that he's looking for. And they train him to learn that when he finds that, he gets a reward. So that's how Deacon does his work. He is what we call a food reward dog. So who knows what that means? What's a food reward dog? So the only time that Deacon eats is when he works. So every day he has to work to eat. Every day he has to find ignitable liquid. And when he does that, he shows me that he found it. And then I reward him with food. So for the last almost 7 years, the only time Deacon has ever eaten is out of the palm of my hand. And it's only when he's found his training aid or something in a real life scenario where he's identified that ignitable liquid that we've trained him to find. So one of the responses we get from that typically is, oh man, your dog has to work to eat. Like he's not a normal dog, or the poor dog. But dogs in the wild, how do dogs in the wild eat? Do they have a bowl of food that they get morning and night? Not so much, right? So how would a wild dog eat? They have to hunt. That's exactly right. So through this training, through making him find something and then be rewarded with food, is simply reactivating that hunting instinct that dogs possess. Because if he were to live in the wild, he would be looking for berries or mice or whatever other thing. And trust me, he would eat anything that he came across. No matter how bad it smells or how old it is, he will find it and he will eat it if I don't keep him on a leash. And so essentially through this training process, we, like I said, sort of re-energize that natural hunting instinct that these dogs have. And we train them to, instead of hunt for the wild berries that they may in the wild, he's hunting for ignitable liquid. And when he finds it, he gets fed. So to them, it's actually energizing. Dogs that have a job, you can see them, the excitement in their life when they go to work, because like anybody, they're driven by a purpose. And so there are a few critics that you'll hear, like I said, that feel bad for him because he has to work to eat. But in his eyes, he's simply using that part of his brain that he otherwise would have shut off. And so when we learn something new, when we work and we are rewarded, we all feel a little bit better. And certainly with him specifically, when he works, you can see the energy. You can kind of see a smile on his face. You can see him excited about going to work and doing that and finding that reward. He's rewarded for the hard work that he's doing. And it's really actually exciting for him. So that's sort of how the food reward process works. So every day, like I said, I have to set up scenarios for him so that he can go find them. And I liken it to playing a game of hide and seek. So every day, multiple times a day, and different places all over the place, we set up these games of hide and seek. I put out training aid for him to find, and he has to go find it. And when he finds it, he gets fed. So we play this back and forth game every day. No matter if I'm working, if I'm not, if I'm sick, there's always a portion of the day that's dedicated to working with Deacon. And what that does in a lot of ways is it reinforces that he has to hunt to eat. It reinforces that when he finds ignitable liquid, he gets rewarded. And it reinforces for him that he has a purpose. And so he's constantly looking for that next time to work, that next time to train. And like I said, it's really something that's exciting for them. So that's sort of how the process works and what he does for us. Any ideas on what he does when he finds ignited liquid? How does he tell me that he found it? Anybody? He does not bark. Funny story about Deacon. In the 7 years that we've been together, I probably only heard him bark twice, and it was one bark each time. He's the quietest dog I've ever come across in my life. Doesn't bark. Any other ideas what he does? See, he sometimes lays down if I don't see him in time. So he sits, he'll get into a sit, and he won't leave. So he'll sit, and if I don't come back to him and feed him, reward him for what he found, he will stay there until I do. I could pull the collar off his neck with a leash if he was telling me that he found what he was looking for. And when he gets frustrated with me, like if I'm not quick enough and he gets frustrated and he's sitting there, he'll start pointing with his nose. He'll be like, point, it's like over here, and I'm not leaving, right? So he'll put his nose to wherever he found it. And so he goes into a sit, and I reward him with a handful of food, and that's how it works. He knows when he's working because I have a food pouch. It's just a little black bag, and I put it on my belt. And the folks that were here early, they saw that he's a normal lab. He's a typical friendly, wants to see people, loves to be pet, loves to be socialized with all kinds of others. But when I put my food pouch on and he goes to work, he instantly shuts off the rest of the world. And the same people that he was making friends with earlier, if you were standing there and he was working, he would probably not pick his nose up off the ground. He'd just keep walking right by you, do his job. And then once I take his food pouch off, he becomes just your average everyday dog again and wants to come back and be your friend. Again, you're activating that part of their brain that most of our pets just simply don't have to activate, because most pets get fed morning and night, or maybe 3 times a day. They don't have to think about or engage that part of their brain. And when I say that part of our brain, it's a significant portion of their brain. How much, I don't know any biologists in the room? Anybody a human anatomy scientist? Probably not. I'm not sure how much of our brains are dedicated to motor to process the world around us. But a dog's brain is somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of their brain. So imagine 25% of your brain being dedicated solely to smelling things and then shutting that portion off. It's a huge amount of your brain you're just not using. And for your average pet, that's just not a part of their life. And so they're not utilizing all that energy that they have. Whereas him, like I said, between 1/8 and 1/4 to maybe even more, depending on the dog, is dedicated to that olfaction, that, using their olfactory senses. And that actually brings me to the next point. So what are some reasons that we use dogs instead of people or machines or whatever else to do the same job? How are they physically more capable than, say, a person who's interested in smelling things? Huge, right? Significantly more. Any ideas? So I'm going to ask questions. So how many olfactory receptors, which are the nerve endings, if you will, in our nose that actually allow us to smell? But how many olfactory receptors does the average human have, give or take? About 100 million, you think? All right. Anybody else? 1,000? 1,000? That's a pretty good range. Probably somewhere right in the middle between those. So about 5 million olfactory receptors for the average human, give or take. Now, I don't know who has actually counted each of those along the way, but it's probably an estimate. And so if we have about 5 million, how many do you suppose the average dog has? So from 5 million to the average dog, which is, you were actually a very good guess. So between 200 and 300 million. So if we can smell the 5 million and they have 200 to 300 million, do we think that they probably have a greater physical ability to smell? Their noses are just big for looks. It's big because it's got a lot of things in there that are happening. But more so than that, they just smell differently than us. I was telling Marcel when we started, I give the same talks at kindergarten classes or professional lawyer groups. And I use the pizza analogy. So if I were to have come into this room an hour before this started and I brought in a stack of pizzas and I left them in the corner, when you walked into the room, what would you smell? You smell pizza, right? But dogs don't smell that way. They do something called scent discrimination that we just can't physically do. They smell very differently. They smell in very clear layers, if you will. Think about a Rolodex. So when a pizza, if you were to use a recipe to make a pizza, you used a Rolodex, which I'm sure you folks remember, but kids don't anymore. And it has individual cards for each ingredient. There's a lot of cards there. We as a human only smell the whole Rolodex. We smell the pizza. But as a dog, if they're acute, if their senses of smell are acute rather than your average pet who forgot how to smell, they smell each ingredient entirely separate. So they smell pepperoni, and they smell cheese, and they smell sauce, and they smell the dough. They smell those things in layers. And even more so than that, they can tell you, they smell each individual spice that's in the sauce. They smell each individual topping, not just a group of toppings. And they can differentiate the ratios of them. So if they were to tell the difference between, they could tell the difference between one pizza and another if one had more sugar in the sauce than the next. Now, how they figured that out, I don't know, but I trust that it's true because I see the way that it works. One of the other things that we do, just in the sheer volume of their ability to smell things that we can't, dogs apparently through testing can tell the difference between an Olympic-sized swimming pool that's got water in it and an Olympic-sized swimming pool that has 1 cube of sugar. Wild. The average human can smell, you could, if you really tried, you could take 2 cups of coffee, one with sugar, one without it. You could probably tell it has sugar in it, has a sweet smell. A dog can apparently tell the difference in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which is a huge feat. It's just absolutely wild. So we essentially, for lack of a better term, we exploit that natural ability and we use it to our advantage by helping us to find something in a fire scene. Because if anybody's driven by a building that had a fire or had a fire at their own home, what does it smell like? It smells like a fire, right? It just smells kind of gross. But the dog, despite that overwhelming odor of just the generally burned things, they can smell still, they can discriminate between all the different odors of that building. One of the issues that, that comes to mind when you think about a building that's had a fire, almost everything in our lives, maybe not this room because it's actually old and still has wood, but almost everything in our lives are petroleum-based. Chairs, these plastic chairs, that's a petroleum-based product. The coatings on these tables are petroleum-based. The paints, potentially, if this is an oil-based paint on the walls here, on the floor, those are petroleum-based commodities. And what are ignitable liquids, most generally? They're also oil-based products, right? They all are derived from the same general, starting product of a crude oil and then refined into these different things. And even when they're burned and even when they look like the same melted plastic mess, dogs are able to differentiate between what falls within the spectrum of an ignitable liquid and what does not. And that's how they're super, super useful to us. The human eye, the human nose just isn't able to detect those differences. So that's one reason why we use dogs. They're just sheer capability. They're incredibly physically able to make those differentiations that we are not and discriminate between things. What's another reason why we might use a dog to find an ignitable liquid? Even if we had a tool that I could walk around the room with, and we do. I mean, there are tools at our disposal through the scientists at the crime lab to differentiate these things. But what can a dog do much differently than a human can do? If I were to check every square inch of this room after a fire for the ignitable liquid, how long could that potentially take me? It'd take me a long time, right? If I had to cut a sample out of the floor in every place and bring it to a crime lab and have them analyze it and tell me if there was something there or not, how long would that take? Days, weeks? It could take an infinite amount of time because I have to take a sample, put it in a can, take it to the crime lab, have them analyze it. And anybody ever watch like TV crime shows, you hear the GC mass spec, right? The gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. So that's what the chemists use at the Maine State Police Crime Lab. We send them fire debris, goes to the lab, they run it through the GC mass spec, and they identify what liquids, if any, are in that fire debris sample. And they can tell us if it is a light petroleum, a medium petroleum, a heavy petroleum distillate, gasoline. They can tell us exactly what is in that fire debris sample, even though we can't tell the difference with our own senses. So if I were to do that for every one of these, and that can take weeks to get those results back, we're talking weeks. But he can work in this same room and sit down and point with his nose at an area that he believes there to be an inedible liquid in a couple minutes. So the efficiency of these animals as a tool is incredible. Like I said, we've moved from weeks to minutes to identify areas of potential concern or interest in a fire scene that would otherwise take us an unknown amount of time. So they're incredibly efficient. Minute for minute, time for time, they're incredibly efficient. And I kind of mentioned it earlier too. One of the other things is, does Deacon know or care, for that matter, how or where a fire starts? He doesn't care about where a fire starts. What does he care about? He cares about food. That's it. So when I bring him to a fire and I have him walk around and search an area for me, he is completely unbiased. He doesn't think when he walks through the door, oh, the fire started over there. He doesn't care where the fire started. He only cares about finding what he knows to be a source of food for himself. So I may have a preconceived notion. I may think I'm the smart guy in the room and I know where the fire started. And if it were up to me, I would maybe only point him in that direction. But he doesn't want to be pointed in that direction. He wants to only go and hunt and find the thing that's going to feed him. So he brings a layer of maybe a little checks and balances on us, right? As people, we're always biased. We always are challenging ourselves to fight those biases. We make a determination in our own brain, whether we intend to or not, about what we think happened, but he doesn't care about that. And that's an incredible tool as well. I can think of an example. I had a fire a number of years ago now. It was in a home somewhere in Oxford County, and it was an arson. We knew it was an arson. There was a small fire that didn't extend, it didn't grow and burn the building down. And so there was a small fire in one portion of the house, and the rest of the house was generally undamaged. And he and I were recently partnered together, and I worked him through this fire scene, and he sat down in the living room and he wouldn't leave, and he made me feed him. And I was like, there's no fire in here. There's no, my conscious brain wasn't trusting my dog, which is the first rule that you're never to break with your dog. You're always to trust your dog. And I eventually, I took him off it. He came back, he sat in the same place. I took him off it. He sat in the same place. I finally fed him, and I thought, there's no way he's right. And I just moved on with my day, and I chalked it up as a mistake. Well, it was a seasonal home, and when the homeowners arrived, they actually had one of those game cameras that takes photos on motion activation inside their living room. And so they gave us the game camera, and we pulled the footage, and sure enough, the person responsible for the small fire had been in the living room and poured lighter fluid on the carpet in the living room where there was no fire, where he sat and told me it was. So again, he's unbiased. I went there thinking there's no fire, there's no evidence there, there's no reason for me to take anything, but he knew better. And so that was a pretty good lesson as a brand new handler with a brand new partner, that I should always trust my dog. And so now that's what I do. So again, that unbiased approach that he takes is really, really incredible. So that kind of sums up sort of why we use dogs, how we use them. I mean, there's a million reasons, but those are kind of the big three for me, is that they have just an incredible ability. They're unbiased and they're super, super efficient. But what's another big reason that we use dogs and that we do speaking engagements like this? Anybody? What's the big, maybe the most important reason, aside from helping us find evidence? What might be the greatest accomplishment that he's done for me or for the whole state in the last 7 years? What's that? Everybody does love him. Anything else? What's that? Yeah, humanized fires, yeah. What he does that I think what might be a really hard thing for us to quantify when the budget folks in Augusta are like, well, why are we paying for this dog? What might be something that's really difficult to quantify? I see people thinking. I'm going to give you a second. Come here. Come here. All right. Nobody? Anybody from Facebook land? Anybody have any guesses? What's a really hard to quantify, but incredibly important job that he and the other dogs we have do? Not just him, all of them. What do you mean? He's quick. It's efficient, right? But that one I can quantify. I can say, hey, we were there 10 minutes and he saved us 10 days. The one that we can't quantify is prevention. We do these public outreach pieces in part because the more people know that we have this amazing tool, the less likely they are to try and start fires if they know they're going to get caught. And that's kind of the message that we deliver with these dogs, which is if you start a fire and you use an ignitable liquid, we are going to find you and they're going to help us do it. And I think it's so hard for us to know how many people have thought to themselves, man, I really want to do this, but I saw that dog and I don't want to get caught. And we hope that that number, hopefully it's a small number, but in the bigger sense, if we've prevented one fire or one fire from being set that grew to the point where it became really, really dangerous because somebody was concerned about getting caught by one of these dogs, then I think that they've paid for themselves 100 times over. I mean, your average house fire loss now, and I don't know the exact numbers and I don't work for the insurance company, but I have to imagine to have $1 million fire loss claim on even a residential fire is probably pretty common. And so if we're saving that financial piece, but we're also saving one person from being victimized, from having a big fire and being a victim of an arson because someone was afraid that they get caught, then how can we measure that success, if we will? And I like to think that these types of things, I was going to find the sun, see. Okay. I like to think that if we're going to measure the success of these animals as partners in our effort to fight and prevent arson, then we have to count that piece, which is so hard for us to put an actual number on. So, that's one of the things that I think is super, super important that they don't necessarily get the credit for that they should. Yeah, they're really great at their job. So, yes, exactly. It's really, really difficult for us. So anecdotally, I think that we can show that there are less fires that are what we would call accelerated. I think that we still have arsons, but there are many that we go to that haven't really been successful because someone hasn't used something as volatile as an ignitable liquid that would help a fire to grow very, very quickly. They're avoiding we hope that, or we suspect, which is really all we can do, that they're choosing not to use something like an accelerant because they know that we're going to catch them. And if you're not using an accelerant, you're going to have less success in getting that fire to grow the way you want it to as an arsonist. And so again, hard for me to even guess at what that number might be. But I like to think, if you will, that we do have some success in that arena. Let me think. A little bit about the program that he's in. Actually, I'll talk about the programs that we have in the state. We run dogs from 2 separate organizations. Like I said, he came from an organization called Maine Specialty Dogs. It is run by a couple of trainers from the Maine Police Academy who are certified police K-9 trainers. They operate the program and have done so for over 30 years now. And he's certified by Maine State Police with me. We're a handler or K-9 handler team. And over the last 30 years, they've put about 400 dogs in service across the country. So in my particular class, we had 7 dogs that went through the class. There was me, a team from New Jersey, a team from Florida, a team from Michigan, a team from Nebraska, and a team from one of the Carolinas, North Carolina, I believe. So even in just my small class, we, reached basically 3/4 of the way across the country. There are active teams as far away as Hawaii. There's a couple of teams in Canada. And there are teams, I don't know if they're in all 50 states, but I know that we have, California has started to pick up a handful of teams. So the reach of this program is really, really wide. And so we have 2 dogs from Maine Specialty Dogs here in Maine. And then we also have a dog from the other big program in the country, which is ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They train dogs, and they also essentially give them to public safety agencies to use in the field all over the country to prevent and fight the crime of arson. So, like I said, he's one of, I think there's about 120 active teams right now for Maine Specialty Dogs. ATF may have about the same number. And then there are a few individual states that also train their own dogs, but it's pretty low numbers. So right now in the country, there's probably only between 250 and 300 dogs that do this job. So pretty unique skill set for a dog to have, pretty unique tool for us to have in this state. And something that I think is really, really both rewarding for me and rewarding for the agency, and gives Deacon a great purpose that, he seems to still enjoy. He's 8, he'll be 9 in February. So he's starting to get into his, maybe his senior years, although he's still super healthy. We've been really lucky. These dogs, one of the questions we get sometimes is, do these dogs experience illness from being in fires all the time? And truthfully, their level of health is typically better than your average pet because they're on a very restricted diet, on very good food, and they get adequate exercise every day. So unlike your average pet who maybe overeats, gets table scraps, doesn't get a lot of exercise, they do all those things that we're told are good for us. Eat healthy, exercise, stay engaged, and they actually have really, really good health overall. So no real ill effects of the work that they do. Cancer obviously is a concern for people that are engaged in the fire business, but cancer is one of those things that typically takes so long. It has such a long gestation period from the time of exposure to the time of impact on your body. The dog's lifespan just isn't really that long, so we don't find that they have an increased level of cancer over your average animal. Trying to think, anything else that we could cover specifically? Questions in the room? Sir. Oh, wait for Marcella.
What if there's a fire scene where you don't know how it started or if there were accelerants or not, and no accelerants are found? Is the dog then frustrated and doesn't get fed?
We train a fair amount actually on working in fires that there is nothing for him to find. And we do that so that he doesn't think everywhere he goes, he's going to find something. So I wouldn't say that he gets frustrated, but he certainly gets excited to go to work and hopes to find something. And when he doesn't, then typically what I'll do is leave there, go somewhere down the road, put out a training aid for him to find and reward him there. So he'll never go without for the day. But we're actually very careful. It's a great question. And we're very careful to train him both on scenes that he will in fact find something and scenes that he will not, so that he doesn't have an expectation that everywhere he goes, he finds something.
I have 2 questions. How long after the fire is out that you will successfully go with your dog? Like next day, a week later? What's a
really, really good question? Totally depends. I can't answer it with any specificity because it depends on a lot of things: how long the fire burned, what the weather conditions are, what the ignitable liquid was that they used. If it's something that's very volatile and would evaporate quickly, obviously that would have an impact. The substrate that it's on, if it is in wood or carpet or furniture or something else that would absorb a lot more of that and hold on to it, or if it's on a tile floor or a concrete floor that may not hold on to it as long. So there's so many factors. I know that there's been some data out of Canada, and I don't know the specifics, but it's just in a general overview, where they had a bunch of wildland fires in an area that experiences permafrost. And they were able to take core samples that were over a decade old. And because they remained frozen for so long, they held on to ignitable liquid evidence inside those core samples. And the dog is what led them to the areas to take those core samples.
Wow.
So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Now, that wouldn't be the case on a hot summer day. It may evaporate pretty quickly. Again, you're talking about volatile chemicals that are impacted by time and heat and all those different things. So it's a good question. I wish I could give you a better answer.
Next question is, could you tell us what the K-9 started? I mean,
Well, dogs are K-9s, but spelled C-A-N-I-N-E. And I think it was just like anything, an abbreviation that started
K-9.
probably years ago.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and now it's been adopted sort of universally as how we identify a working dog. Of
thank you.
course.
How long do you think it'll be before he retires?
Also a moving target. So the minimum amount of time that we have to commit to work the dog is 5 years. We're in our 7th year, so we've fulfilled our commitment. And it's a decision that is generally based on their health, their interest in continuing to work. My interest in continuing to work with a dog. It's an additional duty on top of our regular duties. So I handle Deacon and train him as an extra part of my job. It's not my only job. It's just something additional. So you kind of have to factor in all those different things. And with him, he's still a workhorse. He still loves going to work. He still does a really good job. He's still got a really high success rate.
As long as he looks forward to doing it.
Yeah, yep. And he likes to eat. So as long as he's still interested, then I don't really have that end date, but it's certainly on the horizon. There are dogs that I know have worked until they're 12 or 13 years old, and plenty others that they've retired at 7 or 8. So I don't know. I just don't know.
I have a question. So once Deacon retires, where does Deacon go?
Deacon will come and live with me and my family, just like he does now. So really the only transition for him will be that he no longer goes to work with me every day. He'll just have to stay home and become the family pet only. We'll start to feed him like your average pet, and he won't have to work anymore. Although I suspect he's still going to want to engage that part of his brain somewhat. So we'll have to find ways to just kind of keep him entertained and engaged. But yeah, he'll retire into our home and just live with me and my family like any other pet while he enjoys his retirement years. Hopefully long.
You get another dog?
Again, I don't know. I think I'm scheduled to get another dog right now. But a lot of that's going to depend just on when we decide to retire him and, when the next class is and kind of how that all works out. But so far the plan is, yes, I'll retire him and get a new working dog. But like anything, who knows?
I have a question. I might have missed this because I was a little bit late, but what kind of problems do you run into when you take an acid to court and then you say, well, the dog proved it was acid, and then what I know the chemists and the researchers take samples, they probably, they take it into
Yes.
a lab and they confirm it, right?
Yes.
But they say, well, the dog proved, the dog initially proved it was acid, and then of course, it's a prosecutor's job to prove that it was that person that did the acid,
Yes.
But do you get hassles with, do you get any problems with defense attorneys or something, say, well, how's a dog know?
Well, it's always a defense attorney's job.
Credentials too, like they have to do the credentials of other people. I guess that's what
It's always a defense attorney's job to try and, of course. Yeah, so certainly always a defense attorney's job to try and raise doubt, and they certainly will. We keep daily records of all of our training, and every year we get recertified by our trainers who confirm that we're doing the things we need to do, that the dogs are still working appropriately. And then to your point, the evidence that he identifies that I then collect goes to the crime lab and gets confirmation. And so the evidence that ends up being presented at the end of that is what was confirmed by the chemist at the lab. Yeah. So he's a tool that we use, a resource that we use in the field, but really the crime lab is what gives us that final sort of confirmation of evidence that's applicable. Good question.
Okay, thank you. Is there any way that the dog can tell you if the accelerant was lighter fluid or diesel or?
So he knows, I'm sure, in his
Yeah.
brain what it smells like, but we haven't figured out a way for him to tell me yet.
All right,
So he has the same alert. He indicates the same way and tells me where to get it. And then we have to wait for the lab to give us
Yeah.
that description.
thank you.
Yes.
Oh. Thank you.
That's interesting, really. Good program.
Thank you.
The propane explosion in Farmington a year ago, would he detect that sort of thing in the air? So, if they're a threat or some suspicion of something?
I don't know. I don't specifically train him on liquid propane because liquid propane is compressed, and so it typically doesn't exist in the environment around us. And I don't know its chemical composition, so I guess I wouldn't dare answer that. How's that?
Crime lab, when you're training these dogs, the state police have dogs too.
Yes.
So are all the do all the dogs start in the same program, and then after they get through whatever the initial programs are, they branch off, like this dog goes to the Accelerant program, and then the police dogs go to, I don't know, murder cases or whatever they go to, or
Yeah, no,
they
so,
branch off to different after.
yeah, no, so
after the
Deacon
primary
was,
stuff, they go to different specialties.
no, so Deacon was specifically, all of his training was specific to his job. So he didn't start out as a drug dog and then be repurposed. He was specifically, from the time he was acquired to do this job, it was one specific thing. So they don't necessarily all start in the same pool. Yeah, they don't necessarily start in the same pool. Yeah, they're sort of picked and then, you know, put into those categories that they want to work them and trained specific to that. Yeah. Anybody else? How am I doing on time, Marcel? Do you want, I could talk about nothing for 10 minutes if you'd like, but. Yeah, no, I think I'm good. I mean, if there's more questions, great. But certainly I think I covered most of the topics that you're looking for. Is there anything specific that I could cover that you guys have an interest in? All right, great.
Are there specific breeds that are chosen for this type of work?
So all of the dogs that come through this program and ATS program are labs or a Labrador Golden Retriever mix. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. But the biggest ones are that they typically have very strong food drive. They are happy to work. They're happy to please their handlers. So they're a pleasing breed. They want to make me happy. And they are very good in scenarios like this, where we can go to schools and do outreach and not really worry about them biting kids, which is good. We can work these dogs in a crowd of people. Like I could put him to work looking for someone with, say, gas on their clothing in a crowd and not be concerned that he's going to be spooked, like maybe a higher drive type of, you know, typical Malinois or Shepherd type dog might be. So they're the whole program that he's from, as well as the ATF program, all the programs that we participate in Maine all use like a Labrador breed.
Could he be trained after you're done with him?
Could he? Probably, but he won't be, because he's going to retire and live with us and live on my couch. So I'm not gonna put him back to another job. Once he retires, we're gonna call it good.
You work 7 days a week, overtime?
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, no, nothing. Well, not yet for dogs, but I'm not to say that won't happen eventually. But I mean, look at him. He doesn't look too abused, right? He's doing okay.
When did you eat last?
What did we do last? I gave him a little bit of training home this morning. That's the last thing he had for today. And then once we leave here, we're actually to that point. I do something different every day. I feed him at different times a day. I feed him at different places every day. I I always strive to have a variety of feeding scenarios so that he's never expecting the next meal, so he's always looking for the next meal, if that makes sense. We like to keep him on his toes. He loves it. Look at him. He's happy. All right. Very welcome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, they're clapping. They're clapping for you.